Right, back from Azerbaijan. Quite a good trip, really interesting place. I really enjoy going there. But I've come back to, as I always do, to quite a long job list from Mrs. P. Time to take on the grass. Right, so the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it was great, wasn't it? I mean, so much ended up happening that you couldn't take your eyes off the screen for more than a couple of minutes. It ended up being action-packed, but I guess a large part of that action and that excitement and the drama came again from the introduction of the safety car, didn't it? And the incidents that were on track. But I suppose that was probably always going to happen with the nature of that circuit. So the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, that Baku street circuit, I think is a really great one because it creates situations where drivers make mistakes, and that creates opportunities for others. There's that long straight that gives always an overtaking opportunity, you know, on pretty much every lap, with or without DRS. I think it's a pretty good setup for a Grand Prix, that. Anyway, I guess one of the biggest talking points, and certainly the thing that I've had most messages about since Sunday afternoon, is what did we think of that Red Bull incident? Whose fault was it? Who was to blame? Look, Niki Lauda, I think, came out and said it was 70% Max Verstappen, 30% Daniel Ricciardo. I think I probably agree with that. I think Max Verstappen has this incredibly aggressive way of defending when he's under attack, and it's on the borderline of being legal. My actual opinion of what happened on Sunday was that Max moved twice in the braking zone, and that's not allowed. We've seen people penalised for it in the past. I think Daniel equally commits to things that are borderline, but generally he makes the right judgment call and gets away with it. If you think back to China, the way Daniel Ricciardo put that move on Valtteri Bottas, I mean, there was nothing in it, millimetres, whether that move was going to be brilliant or an utter disaster. And only, I guess, because of the reasoning from Valtteri Bottas that he decided not to defend aggressively, did they manage to not make contact. So, you know, Daniel was coming in at a hell of a speed. That's one of the things that slipstreaming, the power of the slipstreaming effect along that straight means that his closing speed was phenomenal. And, Max is just utterly relentless in his defence. He will not ever give up. And on one hand, you want to see that side of a racing driver, but on the other hand, his team have just lost an absolute hatful of points, and we could all see it coming a mile off, couldn't we? I mean, how many times did they touch wheels during that Grand Prix before that incident? The team need to clash their heads together. I think that by the sounds of what Christian Horner said on Sunday night, they already have. I think that the drivers have been told they've got to go into the factory and apologise to the hundreds and hundreds of people at Milton Keynes who put so much effort into giving those two drivers the opportunity and the tools to go ahead and challenge for race wins. And yet, because of their sort of impatience, petulance, whatever you want to call it, sort of lack of thought of the bigger picture, they threw the whole lot away in that one moment. So I think, there's got to come a time when Max Verstappen needs to have a look at himself. And I said this after the last race, I don't think we want to temper Max too much, but once he starts costing his team points over and over again, and the points of his teammates as well this week, I think he's got to start thinking a little bit more maturely about how he goes racing. But hey, I really don't want that to be the biggest talking point to come out of that, because it was a good race, it was a great event, and we've come away from Azerbaijan with the championship, super, super close. So look, we're on for a good year. We're looking at a good year in 2018. I can see it. As far as this grass is going, definitely left it too late. The grass is so long that the lawnmower keeps getting bound up by all the huge length of grass that's underneath it. It keeps cutting out, it keeps stopping. And now it's sort of, I think it might have overheated. So, so I'm going to let it cool down. I'm going to have a coffee, and then I'll come back to it. So, as you can see, Pharrell still full of beans. Actually getting a little bit bigger, I noticed, when I got back last night. You definitely notice it, but he's still a fluff bomb and still very playful and loving life. Poor old Wilson has had an operation yesterday. He had the chop. Not sure he knows it yet, but he finally had the chop. So poor little fella today has got one of those great big inverse traffic cones on his head to stop him nibbling away at his stitches. I feel really sorry for him. It's so frustrating when this little guy out here can be out here playing and yet poor old Wilson's got to watch from the window. It's probably going to be a couple of weeks before he's fully back up to speed as well. Poor little guy. Pharrell's developed an absolute fascination with the fluffy cover on my microphone. Thinks it's the best toy ever. So, in other news, on Monday, as we were travelling back from Azerbaijan, there was a meeting going on and a vote, an e-vote by all of the members of the F1 Commission about these proposed changes to the cars, technical changes, to try and aid and improve overtaking moving forward and from 2019 onwards. And we have had a decision. Just look how long that grass is. That is ridiculous. I've left that way too long. It's no wonder the lawnmower keeps grinding to a halt. Anyway, as I said, we have had a decision on these 2019, so next season, changes to try and encourage overtaking with the modern Formula One car. It didn't need to be a majority, it didn't need to be a unanimous verdict to get these changes passed for 2019, as long as we did it before the 1st of May. After the 1st of May, the regulations state that we need to have a unanimous agreement to make any changes to the following year's regulations. So up until that point, we needed majority consensus to get the changes passed. So, in true Formula One style, we left it until the very last day of April and we had an e-vote with all of the members of the F1 Commission. There is lots of resistance to some of these changes, proposed changes to the cars to try and improve overtaking. However, with the few teams that voted for it, plus all the other members of the Commission, like F1, like the FIA, like the major sponsor parties, other people who sit on the F1 Commission, we managed to get this across the line. So we had an e-vote and the decision has been passed. So the changes for next year include a much smaller and much more simplified front wing. That's the first thing. Now the reason for that is that the front wing is one of the major elements that contributes to the huge, turbulent wake out of the back of a Formula One car going along a straight at speed. If you're the following car, you get into that sort of void or that area behind the lead car where all the turbulence is, and as a result of that, because your front wing is so sensitive, you lose a huge amount of downforce on the car, and therefore, once you get into a corner, you can't follow closely because your car's lost all of its grip, and you can't push as quick. Can't go as quickly. You can't push as hard. So, for 2019, the front wings simpler and smaller, and they have a much less exaggerated outwash effect. Now, what that means is the current wings and all the flaps on the wing and the end plates are all designed to send an outwash of airflow out from the front wing of the car, a sort of series of spinning vortices, almost like a wall of air that's pulling away from the car. And what that does is it drags with it the turbulent wake from the front tyres of the car, pulls that away from the car, because that turbulent wake adversely affects the aero at the back of the car, the diffuser and the rear wing. So we don't want the horrible, turbulent, messy airflow off the front tyres affecting the rest of the car. So the current designs all have this big outwash that pulls that turbulent wake away from your car. Now what that also does is makes this huge turbulent area behind the car that the next car, of course, as I say, kind of trips over and falls into, and has a really big adverse effect as a result. So the regulations for next year will try to avoid outwash design Formula One front wings and have them smaller and simpler. The brake ducts, which currently have got all sorts of little flaps and winglets bonded all over them, will also be very much simplified, so they will become smaller and simpler as well. The rear wing of the car is going to become bigger in effect, partly because we need downforce on a Formula One car, and that's a way to generate it, and the effect of that, the aero effect off that, is less dramatic to the following car than the front wing, but actually more so than that. If you have a bigger rear wing, the DRS effect when that rear wing opens is greater. So the idea is that when the following car gets within a second of the car in front, opens the flap on the rear wing, if that flap is bigger and the rear wing is bigger, you can essentially dump lots more downforce with DRS and lots more drag essentially than you can in today's cars. And that means that the overtaking effect of a DRS pass will be greater, and therefore we might see more cars challenging for overtakes. That's the theory behind the whole thing. This has all come from research conducted by Liberty, so FOM, I think the FIA have been involved. The teams have now done their own CFD research as well off the back of this, and it is deemed that this will have a largely positive outcome. I think there is still a big feeling, and I kind of subscribe to this, that we haven't done enough research, and actually the negatives that come from this, could have, effects that we don't even yet know about. And that's always the difficulty with these things. F1 has a habit of launching into almost knee-jerk reactions without taking into account all of the consequences. And this whole idea essentially came from that what was on the face of it, pretty dull race in Australia at the start of this year, where there was hardly any overtaking. That's what's prompted this knee-jerk reaction. And on one hand, great that we can be this reactive in Formula One. There's no point in us sitting on cars that don't work for the next 3 or 4 years until we get to 2021 and the big changes. But on the other hand, Australia was a bit of an anomaly. It's always a circuit that has very little overtaking, and therefore, and actually if you look at the rest of the next 3 races, they've been absolutely spectacular. They've been brilliant. So I kind of agree with what's turned out to be the majority of the teams who don't necessarily want this to happen now and think it should be a much more considered change as part of the big changes that are coming for 2021. What do you think? I think this splits opinion both within the paddock, and I'm sure amongst you guys, I'm sure amongst fans it must split opinion as well, but let me know what you think. Good or bad?
I think I can get another row, so I want 3 and 3. So the vegetable garden, so it's going to be fenced off.